everybody. Are we good? Ash? All right, glad to see everybody made the transition from our classroom. I kind of like this one better. We should switch classes over to this if we can, because this is pretty cool. Today is going to be our first guest speaker. I told you before, it's my brother. So give him a lot of grief in the Q&A as much as possible. He is the senior footwear merchandise manager for Europe, Africa, and the Middle East for Brooks Running. And he's going to talk today a little bit about Brooks and as a subsidiary and its influence on sustainability. In the field of sustainability, he's going to talk about how they think about sustainability in Brooks Running. And then he's going to talk a little bit at the end about kind of what it's like to live abroad and how to develop skills or what kinds of skills they're looking for in global companies. So please welcome Brad Fisher.
Everybody hear me? Yeah. Good. Obviously, as my brother mentioned, I'm the FMM of Europe, Middle East, and Africa. It is a subsidiary that we housed in Germany. Our offices are moving to Amsterdam. So we will talk a little bit about that, but I think first and foremost, I know a lot of people here probably have no idea who Brooks is, so I think we should start there. Brooks was founded, we're actually one of the oldest, if not the oldest, in the athletic industry. We actually were established in 1914, which a lot of people don't know because obviously everyone knows Nike and Adidas, but we actually were established in 1914. A little bit of history about who we are. We actually created, back in the day, some ice skating shoes. Even then, we were the makers of the finest athletic footwear, in case you didn't know that. Even up to bowling shoes. So with that being said, it obviously when you begin to stretch yourself as a company, it becomes more difficult to become and maintain profitability. So we rebooted everything and put our emphasis back on running. And why did we do that? Well, part of our ethos and our mission statement is really just to inspire everyone to run and be active. And obviously, when you look at what happens here in the U.S. from the NFL Play 60, we have the same things living in Germany and as well as in the UK. These are really rampant in terms of the people and how fat they are. I hate to say it, but it's the truth. Especially for me as a fat American, that's how I always like to start my presentations with the Europeans, because one of the things that they always emphasize in terms of there's a lot of empirical data to support people when they come into the workplace, and not only from their work habits, but also what they're doing with their outside of their work, which is why a lot of companies, not only in Europe, but living and working in California, and as well as in Seattle, a lot of companies are offering additional time off to go and to do work, whether it's if you're cycling to work or if you're taking your lunch break, and they're off-site campuses. But it's one of the things that we are really trying to get behind. Even from my previous experience working at ASICS, we actually sponsored the Biggest Loser. So that's my former company at ASICS, and that's one of the big things is there is this big push, and it is making its way into the workplace as well. So I think it's really important, and we want to be at the preface of that. So why focus on running? Well, when you look at athletic footwear as a whole, it is by far and large the most profitable, but it's also the biggest category of them all. So roughly about $8 billion in terms of the global running market. So that's worldwide. So then we can talk about Brooks a little bit in our journey and where we're coming from. And our total revenue is just over $500 million. And that's current, but you can see the growth. And when we began to really refocus, and there's a lot of history there from being bought and sold as a company, which is really important. And I'm going to allude to that a little bit later in a couple of slides. But what's really an important thing is when you begin to focus and become laser focused is which we are in terms of running. And how do we do that? And when you talk about the companies like Nike and Adidas, the reason I say Adidas is because it is a German company and the company is based on Adi Dassler. So that's your fun fact for the day. But when you look at Nike, for example, what a lot of people don't realize is Nike is $26 billion. Just to give you an idea how big that company is, it's a machine. BMW is not even as a company $26 billion. That gives you an idea of how big Nike as a brand is. So when you look at our little company like Brooks, how do we compete? Well, we celebrate the run. We talk about this run happy spirit. We invoke in people to not only run and be active, but to be yourself and be an individual. And I think that's what the main thing is. We would really try to invoke this run happy spirit. Be different, be who you are, but you're part of the group. And all you have to do to be part of this group is just run. That's it. You just, to be part of this group and be part of this, you just run, and you're automatically part of this group. Through product leadership, and of course, service as a niche expert. So one of the things, and this starts with our CEO, is when we talk about being a loved brand, and that's our goal, and you look at a company like Apple. Apple is a loved brand. And the reason for that is it doesn't matter what, excuse me, what the people pay for, but they're willing to pay an absorbent amount of money just because it's a loved brand. People love the product. Talk about the iPhone, people love it, it's a loved brand. So when you talk about how do we compete, and for those of you that don't know who this man is, this is Warren Buffett, one of the most wealthiest men in the world. Warren Buffett houses and is the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. We are owned by Berkshire Hathaway. So in terms of how do we compete with big companies like Nike and Adidas, we have a backing of our parent company. Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway roughly is worth probably about $148 billion. So in terms of how do we compete with these big, in terms of Berkshire Hathaway being a multinational conglomerate versus Nike being one brand. Excuse me. So in terms of continuing, how do we compete? Well, it's through runnability. That is our niche. It's talking about the runnability of the product. And of course, there's all these flash, and you look at this, something like, this is the Nike Air Force One, but how do we compete with these guys? And we're not a marketing machine. Nike, for example, spends more money in marketing in one day than we do an entire year. So it's just through runnability. It's our niche. It's who we are. So the next step, when we talk about this in terms of performance running, and I think this is really important for us because we're number 3 in terms of the performance segment. What I want you to focus on here is you look at Nike, and everyone here knows who Under Armour is. In Europe, they don't have a clue. So it's really an American-focused brand. The thing I want to draw your attention to here is the average retail price. So when you look at what Under Armour is selling, Under Armour sells at $59. We're selling at $106. So we're a premium brand. Again, going back to being a loved brand. Apple's never discounted. The most you'll see Apple products discounted at is 10%. We're housed in that same, and that's our goal, is to be this niche and this loved brand. So again, continuing with that is we want to be the brand that's passionately loved by runners everywhere. So a little bit about me and focusing on the product and what I do. So obviously, when we talk about product at Brooks, we talk about product being king. What that means is we put a 3-tiered approach from consumer insights to the science part, and then of course art. That's how we build our products. So in terms of the consumer insights, we partnered with a group called IDEO. They're one of the best in the world in terms of being an industrial design firm. Then onto the science part, we've got 2 of the world's leading biomechanists. This is Dr. Peter Brueggemann. He's housed in the University of Cologne. And then of course we have Dr. Joe Campbell, who's out of UMass, but UMass Amherst. So they're 2 of the world's brightest minds in the field of biomechanics. They're on staff at Brooks. And then of course the third part of this, and probably the most important, is the art part, and it's got to look cool, right? If you make a great product, it's got to look cool. So the third part is the art part, and yes, of course, I just took my shoe off. So in terms of what I do and how do I bring this all together, and for lack of a better term, and what I do is kind of the maestro. And all roads lead through what I do as a product manager. So whether you're in design, development, sales, or marketing, it runs through me. So what that means is we create the brief. So for outside of our industry, it's called concept, so creating the concept. For ICE, we have to write a product brief. So I have to write a brief, I have to present it to what we call the PAC committee, and that's a planned action committee, so it's upper management. Then bringing that concept to design, having the designers design it, then passing off to development. It's still running through us as the product managers. Then it's go to market, or market actualization. So with that said, it all runs through us, and you can see this great picture of Rome, all roads lead to Rome. So what does that mean in terms of my job and how all roads run through us? Well, in terms of sustainability, it's important because that's how we build our products. So I have to have my hand in all facets of it. With that being said, from when we created a shoe called the Green Silence, we utilized using not only recycled car tires from rubber, recycled plastic bottles, couches. We actually tore down couches to create our upper pattern of meshes. But the concept has got to start with me, and I have to write it into the product brief, then pass it off to design, then force the development teams to make sure that they're utilizing the same thing. So in terms of running responsibly and how this touches in all facets is we have access here to the CRR, so the Corporate Responsibility Report. We do it every 2 years, so this is in 2012 and 2013. We'll do it again in 2015. But I think one of the main things here is that I have access to this, and it is public knowledge, so if you can get it from my brother as well, if it's something you're interested in reading through the entire thing, we do have that available. But one of the things that's important to me and as the product manager is I've got to have a hand in every single one of these. As I mentioned, from passing on to not only from design to development to the factories in China, but in terms of the material waste, this is a big portion of what we do. So a big portion is trying to reduce, and what we have here is it's our #1 shoe. It's called the GTS. So it's our go-to shoe. It's our #1 selling shoe. But trying to reduce waste there, not only in terms of if we don't use it to build the shoe, we throw it away. We still have to pay for it. But how do we find a way that it's being utilized and not just being thrown in a landfill, or what a lot of these larger companies have done is dumping them to the Yangtze River. We created a new thing. This is the thing I'm most excited about. It's called Pure Project. And Pure Project was creating a new design philosophy and creation philosophy throughout the entire product line. What we wanted to do, and this is the challenge we have as a manufacturer, how do you create a shoe that has less parts, less manufacturing processes, and less energy used, but still maintain the product that people will love? And that's a challenge, and it's one of the things that a lot of the big companies are challenged with because, for example, I was living in Germany, I always like to give the example of BMW. No one goes out and says, I want to buy a BMW 3 Series, but give me a 1 Series engine in it. Nobody says that. You're paying for a product. So therefore, it was a challenge for us, and this is one of the biggest things that I'm very proud of because it's how we maintained and were able to build this great product. So in terms of just real quickly, in terms of how we're doing this, is one of the things is Sustainable Apparel Coalition, so SAC. It's a collaborative group of about 40 brands and only retailers, and what we're trying to do is just really make sure that we're utilizing things and are all doing the checks and balances to make sure that we're all falling in line and really being pioneers in leading this and not just accepting the norm. And of course, this is all suitable for the Higg Index. So the Higg Index is a new thing, and it's actually our goal is to be part of this as we're going forward into the design tool. And the design tool will be how we as product managers from both apparel and footwear throughout the industry, not just at Brooks, so Nike, Adidas, all the others, utilizing this to reduce waste, to be conscious of what we're using, what we're utilizing, where we're building the products, and of course how we're bringing this to market and telling the story. Throughout this, though, we continue to evolve our sustainability program, but how do we bring that to market is really a big question. And of course, last but not least, not the headquarters I work in, because as I mentioned, I live and work in Europe, but one of the really cool things here is that we're really trying to be not just this is where my brother and I were just having a conversation, is for a lot of Americans to just sit there and say, oh yeah, sustainability just means recycle and reuse, and this is what we're really trying to avoid at Brooks, and this is a picture of our headquarters, and we actually got special permission from the city of Seattle to build this building, because the fact is, it will be it'll be one of a kind and the first of its kind. So that being said, it was really exciting to look at how we're going to build this building, because we had special permission to build it from the LEDs that we're using to the performance. There's a performance structure. As you're walking through, if you've ever seen the stock market, we have a stock market board on every floor in the building that says how much energy is being consumed and whether we need to reduce, or if we're green, or if we're in the red. The next thing is the showers. The showers have a 5-minute limit. They automatically shut off. But also there's a top garden. So it'll gather, I think, 75,000 gallons of rainwater, which in Seattle, that's all they have is rain. So it actually works out well for them. And they're going to use that water from everything to flushing the toilets to the plants and all the fauna that's actually within the building. And then, of course, no vampires. This was a big thing because everybody brings in just your laptop. You can't plug in your iPhone, your smartphone. You can't have any extenuating things that are plugged in because it does tend to pull from the power. Excuse me. And then, of course, just in terms of, we're really, as a running company, to inspire people to run and be active, is making sure that people are getting there in a green fashion. So it's part of a bigger thing, but it's a microcosm of what we are and what we're about at Brooks. And so it really houses all those things, but it has to start with us at our headquarters, because you can't just sit there and preach it, you have to live it. And I think that's the beginning, and I think that's the thing that's really, really exciting for us is it does start at our headquarters, and now it branches out to all facets. So that's it. I mean, it was just a real down and dirty. I know the most important thing is opening up for Q&A and talking about what it is that I do and living abroad and being an American and living here and coming back to the U.S. and then living abroad. So, questions? I don't know if you want to back up.
Yeah, guys, well, first, do you want to talk real quickly about kind of some of the skills, the changing skills since you entered the market today?
Sure. So, I think a lot of the things it's interesting because we talked about it earlier, actually last night, and I think one of the skills even when I was in university was just everyone's talking about, oh, you've got to have these really, really strong computer skills, and everything is going to be housed in computers, whereas at least for my job and my function, the main thing is about presentations, and it's about working in concert with other people and how you work within those people. One of the things I mentioned to Brian, which I think was really successful for our company, is it's called Insights, and it was a group, and it's based on Carl Jung, and how you interact with people and learning about their color and how that color is assigned to their personality type. So therefore, if you have, for example, someone who's blue, they're very analytical. They're people who can sit and live and breathe in an Excel spreadsheet with no problems. Then there's people, but these people tend to be a little bit more introverted, versus somebody like myself, or I'm a little bit more red and direct. This would make me actually really crazy, living and working in an Excel spreadsheet all day long. But it's how do you work with each other and work in concert with each other. I think that's a big thing that was really beneficial to me, at least within our company, because you really learn about their personality types and trying to force, especially when you have people reporting to you, how do you not force them into doing something that perhaps they're not comfortable doing, but at the same time taking them out of their comfort zone to get them to push, to motivate them. I think a lot of the other skills are really just is I think another maybe important factor of utilizing and working within these groups is, especially for my job, and I can only relate because I've been doing this for so long, is you've got to be able to work with many different people in many different avenues, and I think that's the most difficult thing, the most challenging thing for me. But at the same time, because designers are very creative people, but at the same time, you have to work with developers. Developers are all the T's have to be crossed, all the dots, all the I's have to be dotted. They're very different personality types, but I still have to work with them on a daily basis. And I think that's one of the things, especially when you begin to branch out and you begin to work overseas like I do, you really have to be dialed in and be able to accept people from all walks of life. And it's easy to say, but it's another thing to actually do it and actually to utilize those skills.
How did you adjust all the language barriers? I know you're located in many areas.
I think that the biggest thing is, well, English is obviously it's the most spoken language. But living in Germany, that was probably a challenge for me. It's never a language I even learned from growing up in school and then university and living in California. Even learning Spanish, my Spanish is not even on par with being able to, so that's the great thing is them speaking English. It is the form of business, it's the business language. So all of our meetings, with the exception of Germany, because Germany being the largest economy in Europe, you really have to know a little bit of German. But because it's mainly just because they're the largest economy. But at the same side, you have the UK, which is the UK is really just as strong as Germany in terms of economical growth. So mainly English it really is the main language. All the business meetings, and at least what's benefited us is now our president, who used to be our former COO, has moved over and he's now the president of Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So being an American company, we have a little bit of leeway, whereas I mentioned if you work for Adidas or Adidas, it is a German company. You are expected to speak German within their doors, which they have many people who do not. But at the same time, they do offer from your kids to all of your family. So I have a counterpart who just went over to join them. So the entire family gets German lessons for free. So it just depends. But being an American company, that is one of the nice things, and it definitely benefits us, at least in terms of the international global landscape.
I want to talk real quickly about, we were kind of talking about this last night a little bit, that the United States is behind on sustainability, that Europe's definitely
as I made brief mention to it, so the person who helped compile some of the things he actually is responsible for our CRR, or the Corporate Responsibility Report. He is a Brit, but he actually made mention that he's, so Brian wrote just a real quick synopsis of what we would discuss here and kind of what would the ramifications of it be. And he said, I'm just really so thankful that it wasn't this quintessential Americanized approach where it's reduce, reuse, recycle, and that's what sustainability is. And he's like, it's really refreshing to see that it goes beyond that. And by far, let me tell you, it's something as simple as my parents coming over, and our parents are not very young anymore, and just the amount of things that go into just the efficiency in every single thing you do in Germany. And it's part of the mindset, and not just all of Germany, but all of Europe. From Sweden, I heard that Brian, one of the students here that is working now at the university in Sweden. So they're just, I hate to say, but they're just a lot more advanced, and they've been thinking about these things for a lot longer. So it's constituting everything you do from a business standpoint. For us, it was a big thing. Is looking at we have gurus. Gurus are our tech reps. They're the ones who go out to our accounts. They all drive hybrids. They all have to log their miles. They have to keep track of their own carbon footprint because we have so many of them. I mean, that's the point, is they're constantly, for someone like me, I have to keep track of my air mileage. And how do we begin to look at that? I fly 150,000 miles a year. That's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of mileage. So how do we look at things, and is there a way that we can do that and make it a little bit more efficient? Even back in my days from working with ASICS, it's video conferencing. So is there something that we can do via email, a phone conversation, or a video conference, as opposed to flying everyone in? From when our father was in business, everything was by flight. You flew there. That's how you did business. And that's one of the ways that we're really looking at is it something that we can do via video conference and still have the same effect? And I think that's a big thing, is just looking at those little minute and intricate details that really try to push it forward. And those are things that really help us and benefit us, because not only is it reducing waste and reducing all everything that we're putting into it, but it also builds a long-term sustainability within the company. Because the fact is, a lot more people are getting brought in earlier, so to speak. So therefore, for example, when I started my career at Dick's Sporting Goods, you would take a private jet when you went to meet with somebody, but only 12 people could sit there. Now I have 2 assistants, I can take the 2 assistants in with me. So people are being brought into the fold a lot earlier and getting a lot more visibility, as opposed to before. It's only the top of the top who are able to go to these meetings or attend these meetings. Now you're actually able to sit in, and maybe you're not in view of the video screen, but you're being apprised of the situation much more earlier on. And I think that's a huge thing in terms of the development and career of a lot of younger people.
A couple of things I want to, just before we get into the Q&A, that I want to kind of raise. The power of systems thinking. I mean, so much of this is based on systems thinking, not only within the organization itself and trying to understand how your organization functions, but remember, systems thinking really comes down to fit and purpose. And trying to understand Brooks, just like a lot of companies, is they're constantly assessing what's our fit, what's our purpose, what's our market, how can we move forward, how do we streamline, how do we become more efficient, how do we innovate? And I think that this is a good example of that systems thinking in a form that's pragmatic and real and tangible for you guys to grab onto. The second thing is thinking about integrated knowledge. Just thinking about Brad's position requires a tremendous amount of integrated knowledge, from the psychology of people to the actual knowledge of how a shoe is designed, to the production of it, the supply chain, then looking on the back end at the waste stream. You really have to know, and then you have to sell it. I mean, all sustainability has to start, and I'm glad he started with the financial numbers, it has to start with the financial aspect. This is the real world. We live in a capitalistic society. All organizations, it doesn't matter if you're a non-governmental organization, usually NGOs are more focused on money than for-profit companies. You have to start with creating a financially sustainable model. Then you can work on these other things. If you don't, you're going to be out of business and you're not going to make an impact. Or if you're an NGO and you're non-government, you're not going to be able to support yourself. Believe me, NGOs go out of business all the time, even though there's tons of them with great ideas and great issues and topics that they really care about. And they may even have a great avenue into the public and maybe even as a watchdog for keeping corporations and other organizations in line. But financial sustainability is a critical component no matter what kind of organization you're running, from the public to the private sphere. So starting with the financial, I always start with my boss with the financial stuff. If you wait to bring up the financial stuff, that's always a question in anyone's mind. Wait a minute, where's the bottom line? They think a hammer's going to be dropped at the end of it. So you're talking about all this stuff really, and then you're going to have to repeat it all. Because all they're waiting for is, what's the financial bottom line? You always give that up front. And then you can work from there. It's naive to think otherwise, because this is the real world and this is the way it operates. You have to work within that system. So there's a great lesson on those two fronts. And as a young person coming in, thinking about systems thinking, but also thinking about how do you integrate your knowledge? How can you be in Brad's position to be able to assess? You literally have to assess every aspect of it. You can't just bring the knowledge in. You have to be able to apply it in some form to be able to make decisions. And ultimately, his job is on the line based on those assessments. He's responsible for making those kinds of assessments based on this knowledge, this wide range, diverse set of knowledge. Unfortunately, in higher education, a lot of times we focus on the discipline so much that you exit here without that kind of appreciation of integrated knowledge. But I don't think Brooks is all that different than a lot of other corporations right now at the global level and what they're doing. So, yeah, let's definitely open it up now for some questions. Come on, give me a hard time.
I have a question. In your PowerPoint, you talked a little bit about the pre-consumer aspect of how the shoe's made from the sofa. Could you talk a little bit about the post-consumer aspect of the shoe? I know, there's a rough estimate of a pair of running shoes can last anywhere from 300 to 500 miles. So, some people that can be as little as a month. That's an awful lot of running shoes. How do they just go to a landfill?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's in hindsight we only had 20 or 30 minutes, and I really would love to get into the whole technical aspect of shoes. One of the things I'm really proud to say is we were the first to market to create a biodegradable midsole, and it's a water-based adhesive, and all it is actually integrated into the midsole itself. The average, and this goes back to the knowledge of the product, the average running shoe, which is based on, it's just the cushioning, is called EVA, ethyl vinyl acetate. This EVA takes around 1,000 years to break down in the traditional landfill. We were first to come to market with it, and it biodegrades a lot faster. So, and one thing is, it doesn't, to your point, that's the delicate balance is, you have to look at what the average runner is. So it is about 300 to 500 miles. Depending on the style of the shoe, it can last longer. It also depends on the person who's running in it, and the volume and the mass, and then also at the rate of what they're actually running at. So all that has to be taken into consideration. With that being said, though, that was one of the things is creating a biodegradable midsole is because we wanted to be conscious of this, and that goes back to the one things is it's green silence. And the reason we called it the green silence was because we wanted to silence all the critics. The shoe was completely built from the ground up, from design to development to actually go to market actualization, to be a post-consumer as you're talking about this shoe, and we wanted to silence the critics. And everyone's talking about this and being motivated, but it had to be thought of. So for us, one of our midsoles is called BioMogo, so it's biodegradable midsole technology. And that's something it's absolutely something we think of. Does that answer your question?
How do the different levels of knowledge about sustainability across the world affect your advertising?
It depends on the company. So for Brooks, one of the things is, and this is one of the challenges I have. As I said, we have a multifaceted approach. So me being the one American who sits in the European office, I have to kind of be the liaison to represent. I'm an American, but I have to represent my interests that are going on there. One of the big pushes, and this goes back to the European market, it is absolutely a fundamental and appreciated and understood thing. So in the U.S. market, it's not something you would lead with. But over there, it is one of the things that we lead with in talking about the sustainability or making more of a green product or the things that we're doing to try to make a less impact on the planet. When you talk about Scandinavia, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, these are really, really important things. And they pay attention to them because they have beautiful landscapes. The Alps are gorgeous. They want that to stay as it is. And so they are at the precipice of this, and they're emotionally connected to it. So therefore, they are a lot more in tune, and they do understand what's going on. So that is one of the things that I have a challenge with, because in the U.S., it's not something you lead with, especially from a marketing standpoint. But at least in the European side, it's absolutely something we lead with. But at the same time, going back to the bottom line, we are a global company, so we can only push and ask for so many things because, it's, for example, the U.S. it's the largest running market in the world. So we have to follow suit with the U.S. in a lot of ways, but we're able to do some of our own marketing campaigns. But our global marketing campaigns do not always institute that. But on the European side, and this goes back to what we spoke about earlier, it is absolutely something that is a vital part of our business. But again, going back to the bottom line, the U.S. being the largest running market, we do lose a little bit of that authenticity that we would probably gain in the European market. Sorry, did you have a question? We'll come to you next. Either way.
So obviously you keep talking about the bottom line, which is vital in any situation, especially yours, when y'all are. How do these sustainability practices and creating the biodegradable soil, how does that impact your finances, and how is that translated to the U.S. section of your company? Are y'all are headquartered?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering how that affects your finances and if it's beneficial. Why aren't other companies stepping up to it?
So I can't speak for other companies. The sad thing is when you look at these bigger companies, so I'll start there. When you look at the bottom line from a bigger landscape, the sad thing is when you only hear about the larger companies is when you hear about them making an error. You've heard it from G-Star Jeans to Adidas, dumping and reusing things to child labor and things like this. And with a smaller company, we have the ability to be more nimble. But at the same time, these are things we want to be conscious of in making those efforts. How it affects the bottom line is, as I mentioned earlier, we have to present this, or I have to, with my team, present this to upper management. So we have to make what we call a business case. That's it. So you have to include the financials. So, for example, we want to make a new shoe in Europe. We actually have exclusive shoes that we build in Europe that are not for the U.S. market. I have to present a business case, not only including the sustainability of it, what are the long-term goals, but it's the same thing that all has to be compiled into one. So what is the sustainability effort there? How long is this? We usually start with a 3-year plan. So we usually say, this is our 3-year plan. These are what our onset goals are, and this is what we think it will mean for the company. So the main thing, it always starts and ends with the business case. And the planned action committee is what our company calls it, which is the upper management, and they either have a yay or a nay. So yeah, we like what you have to say. We don't think this is financially a responsible effort by you guys, or maybe this is something we want to do 2 years down the road. But all of those things have to be factored into one and has to be presented in the business case. Does that answer your question?
This thinking about sustainability, because thinking about sustainability is really usually the life cycle of a product. And being that you're thinking the big picture, you're thinking the longer term, does sustainability help in making that business case? Because it's not just about greening the product, it's about thinking differently in terms of the life cycle.
Yeah,
Maybe that's
it does. So, and this goes back to being, I think, going back to talking about the life cycle of the product. So, for example, we made the example earlier with the question in the back about how we build our midsoles. There's a different way that we can produce. It's a lot more green. The problem is that even this it's been about 10 years that we've been working on it, not just as a company, but as an industry. And it's just the process of how we make the shoe. I think one of the most important things is you lose a little bit of the elasticity of the shoe, and it doesn't feel the same. And so that's what I go back to, and that's the delicate balance is maybe the market just isn't ready for it. So when you look at a company like Nike, they do make shoes that utilize this process, but they're actually sold at a much lower level. Because the problem is when you're talking about a performance product, and this is our delicate balance when we make these business cases, is it's financially viable. And the problem is that to even hit the small mark, you have to do 100,000 pairs. For the process to even be considered, it has to be a minimum of 100,000 pairs. And there are not many companies out there that even Nike, who's 26 billion, would say, yeah, sure, let's just do that. 100,000 pairs, it's nothing, we'll just write it off. Even that big of a company will still contemplate that because it's such a big number and the consistency isn't there. So when you look at a product like us, going back to being a niche product, it's a difficult decision for us because we don't want to lose that customer who's been with us. And that's the most important thing for us is we are niche, we are small, so therefore we couldn't have a flop. We can't afford a flop. Whereas if you're Nike or Adidas, it's no big deal. It's, yeah, we created a shoe, it flopped, so what, we move on. You have that autonomy to do that, whereas us, don't really have that autonomy because we're just not the size or breadth of what those companies are. But it absolutely is something we begin and end with, and that's what we talk about with and how we create these processes, because it's something we absolutely want to do, but how do we make it and not lose that customer we're a running company. The person who's been running with us for 10 or 15 years, we don't want them to come back and say, Brooks, what the hell? I've been running with you for 10 years, now this feels completely different, I'm switching to somebody else. We just lost a loyal customer. That's really, and that's our lifeblood. So that's really something we have to be conscious of as we go out and build these products.
This definitely builds on what you have been talking about in the past few minutes, and specifically how you deal with other companies that help you create your product. I've got a cousin who works for a textile manufacturing company that sells to Timberland and Reebok. I'm sure a whole bunch that I don't understand. But within the past few decades, he has been specifically charged with bringing that everybody's moving away from it. So eventually you're going to run out of the cheapest labor eventually. So they assessed which of these companies are going to see the most growth. They got in there, they become very intimately involved with growing these companies up and making sure that they had like sustainable business practices, but also they were building homes for the laborers, they were making sure that their quality of life was improved. And that was definitely a huge investment on their part, but those businesses have become kind of leaders in their region. And from that, he's become pretty much responsible for 3 or 4 companies at a time. But they're all basically autonomous. He's just making sure that they are growing in the best interest of his company. So I think that was mostly a question of like, what sort of time scale are you thinking about with your business? That like you need a 3-year goal for a product, but when you start thinking about 10 or 15 years, and that's 5 different types of shoes that you might be creating, would there ever be a thought of maybe we shouldn't stay with this company, or we have to have them grow along with us, or you can just look at the global marketplace and find at the right time the right business to work with?
It really varies, and so each department houses their own. So development is really because they have the closest relationships with our factories. So for example, yeah, absolutely. I know that you talk about this in your courses in sustainability. China is most of the time 90% of what we do is where they're built. It's 30% year over year labor increases. So it's not financially viable, and that's part of the problem that not only us but all the other companies are having, because the way you build products, and this is all the consumer products you buy, the way that products are built. I know your parents, my parents say it, the way products used to be built, they no longer are built that way. So it's not only because it's just not financially viable, but it's also the cost of doing business. It's also the labor increases. So what we do is each department really houses in its own. So it's really difficult to sit here and for me to say yes, because that's the development, that's their job. So that is ultimately their responsibility, because they are the main communicators with China and directly with the factories. Cases come in and present, so these companies that you're talking about will come and present to us. And there's many, many trade shows. There's 1,000 of these companies that are creating these products, and they all want they want to get in with all of the companies like ourselves, the manufacturing side. But again, it comes down to business cases and financial, because a lot of these guys they're in one time and they're right back out. I'll give you an example. In terms of our long-term growth, we have what's called a heel counter. The heel counter is here, is a 3-dimensional heel shape around the Achilles notch. One of the problems that we created is we had a company come to us and they presented a completely green, all recyclable heel counter. The product that they presented to us, and when we actually brought it to market, was not the same product. And the problem that you run into with these really small companies is they can be open one day and close the next. So it's really a delicate balance for us, and you really have to be diligent in terms of the homework and the research. And to use a law enforcement term, you really have to vet them. You really have to vet to make sure these companies are going to be viable and the product is going to be consistent. So that was one of the challenges we had, is we created this completely sustainable heel counter. But when we brought it to market, it was not the same heel counter, because these companies wasn't set up to handle mass production. So the quality completely dropped off, and we had a pretty big issue on our hands. So that's one of the things that we have to look at. It's not really my job, but we always have an open house in-house are an open forum for these companies to come in. And of course, they're always knocking on the door. But in terms of what we do, we're not going to research and go out and search for them, but they'll come to us. But at the same time, because it sounds like what your cousin does, is that's his own business. And there's a lot of these firms that are, especially with, at least coming from California, the surf and skate industry is absolutely huge. A lot of these guys are independent researchers, and they work independent of themselves. And that's a lot of these guys get their startups is they're basically saying, I'm independent, I'll come in and I'll go to your factories for you, and I'll do the independent research, and then I'll give you a completely, not only, it'll be a lot more subjective than what you're getting in-house. So really, it really just depends, but for us, we don't go out and research them, they really do generally come to us. But in terms of the sustainability, again, that's something, I only speak from the product side because I'm the one creating and assisting with the product, but in terms of what we, from a corporate responsibility, there's an entire separate entity of Brooks that handles that.
Other questions?
To what extent in your products, as far as the variety of products you have, the number of different types of shoes, to what extent are you incorporating sustainability into all of them? Or are you just focusing, I know you showed the GTS and also the,
Your project too.
yes, but are you focusing mainly on those two shoe types, or do you also make sure that it's across the board?
Across the board. That's one of the things that all of our shoes have Bottom logo in them, all of them. So it's something that was an onset goal, and that's what we're saying. That was a bigger kind of journey for us, so to speak, is that in creating this, because we wanted to make it throughout the entire line, and then that's where you present a bigger case. So that's really challenged with, we call it future concepts, is what we have our in-house, and that's what they're charged with. So basically, they're just creating these things and coming up with ideas, and they're people in white coats that make a hell of a lot more money than I do. But that's what they're charged with, is basically we go to them and say, we're building shoes, we want to be part of this sustainability, and we want, in terms of long-term growth, how can we make this better and more efficient? And also, how can we create this and make it so it's still consumer-friendly? That is, in essence, what their job is. So all of our shoes have the Biome logo. It is absolutely a fundamental part, and it's a part and parcel for how we build our products. So in terms of how we go out and build each one of them, from not only the Biome logo, but to in terms of the laces that we use, all of our laces are PET, which is recycled from everything, all of these consumer electronics even, all of our laces utilize that technology. So we are at the forefront of this, but those are things that business cases still have to be presented for that. So in terms of long-term growth and is it sustainable from a business standpoint, not just sustainable when we're talking about here, but is it sustainable and can we maintain business from that standpoint?
Question?
Sure.
As you keep talking about the business cases, and I know it varies from company to company, might have been different in basic, but how, not necessarily like a specific percentage, but how often do you find that those business cases are successful? 'Cause I know with the company that I work for, sometimes you can have a project idea and it goes through to a certain extent and then it gets put on the back burner. How successful are these cases that you?
It depends. It really depends on which. So apparel, for example, apparel is a lot more volatile than footwear. So especially for us, our product mix, we on the footwear side, we make up 80% of the total revenue for the company. So therefore, we get about 80% approval. So there aren't many projects that get kind of nullified because the business cases have to be sound, and we really have to. That's what I'm saying. You have to present a true business case. It's not just like, hey, I pulled some numbers, I pulled some Google images. This is what I did. No, it's really got to be rooted in fundamental business and having an understanding of where we want to take this, where we're going to do, and what is the incremental growth. So a big thing for us is ROI, just like any company, is return on investment. And one of the things that we're building on in terms of, again, how we compete with the bigger companies is when we go into a business case for a retailer or one of the big shops like Dick's Sporting Goods. Big Dick's Sporting Goods is the largest in the country here. When you do you're doing a presentation for them, you do something that's a little bit different where we have to present the same to our upper management, which is called GMROI. So it's gross margin return on investment. So they're asking for what's the return on investment and are we leaving money on the table, so to speak. And that's the biggest thing. So that's one of the things we always have to think of is what is the return on investment for us as a company, but what is also the return on the investment for the retailer. And therefore it's built into the business plan saying, we've already found a partner, because there's a lot of times where we've already found a partner, a good good example is we're building a trail shoe for REI. I'm sure everyone knows REI. REI it's a very big company. They're asking for an exclusive shoe. That's the business case in and of itself. They're asking because, hey Brooks, we look to you, you're an industry leader in terms of true performance running. You also make excellent trail shoes. What's the next step for us? We've had exponential growth with you over the past 3 years. That in itself, so there's a business case for us. So it really depends, but again, I don't know what company you came from or what the background is, but apparel is a lot more volatile. It's a lot more difficult, and because the example I gave when you talk about these little shops that open and close, especially on the apparel side, there's a lot of problems. Every company out there has some type of reflectivity, but in terms of the long-term growth of these reflective parts that they use on them, these companies open and close every day. And that's why you hear companies like 3M and Scotch-Lite, which are just huge. That's why they're the mainstay. And so it's just little things like that. They can be open one day and close the next. And that's when without having, so to speak, troops on the ground where these factories are in China, then you just lost that big chunk of change and all that money you invested. So I know that's why I'm not sure what your background is, but from a footwear standpoint, it's usually pretty safe, and we have about 80% approval. But when you look at the apparel side, it's a lot less.
What do you think the relationship is between the way a company is structured and its sustainability? For example, like I know Nike's a really flat company. My brother works for Nike, so I hear a lot about what goes on. But like,
Does he have a Nike tattoo?
he doesn't. He's working on it.
He's one of them.
But I know that they're very flat, and I see a lot of disconnects. Like they'll buy from flights, places, and then just tell them where he's not going. And to me, that's unsustainable because they're throwing money around and they're spending all these resources, bringing all these people in every day, when really they're getting in their own way. So, what do you think the relationship is? Like Brooks being smaller probably has a very different business structure, and they're obviously very environmentally oriented.
So two parts of that is, and nothing against Nike because Nike's just, they're playing a different sport than we are. I think that's the best way to phrase it. But Nike, at the end of the day, is a marketing company. They're not an athletic company. They're a marketing company. The same as Apple. It's all about marketing. And that's why I was making a joke in terms of the references and what they use. If you look at their marketing budget, it's almost the value of our company. So it's just how they approach it. But there are a lot of disconnects. I've been in this industry for a long time. I've had many friends work with Nike and Adidas. The big difference there is the left hand doesn't talk to the right hand. And a lot of times, because they're just so big, a lot of times people working in apparel don't know what's going on in footwear. And then you have to extrapolate it out because it becomes even bigger. Day in and day out, that's it. So for me, I'm handling a lot bigger portion of it because I'm working for a smaller company. So for us, we have to communicate and have those open venues and those open discussions as a company. We have go-to-market strategy meetings from not only in EMEA side, which is Europe, Middle East, and Africa, but they have to tie to what the global business is doing. So we have global business units that are housed just to handle these types of scenarios. So we have to, it's a vital part of our business, whereas Nike, each one is a separate entity. So therefore, they literally don't, because they're so big, they don't talk to each other. And you're absolutely right. I feel in a lot of instances, they are getting in their way, so to speak. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah.
One of the things I could follow up on is, in my applied sustainability class, I have the students read an article which is largely about what Brad's talking about, the inequality in the marketplace, particularly where we see so many of these multinational corporations just keep buying up more and more and kind of growing and growing to the point where they're dominating an entire market. The way the smaller guys that we need to support are able to compete is creating this agile, adaptable organizational structure that where the right hand does know exactly what the left hand, in fact, they're participating together. What this means for you guys is extraordinarily important. Because when we talk about what are vehicles for change, so much, because it's a political science course, and so much of in the past has been political change. We've used the political system and think about our role in government to be able to create change. Today it's shifting. Corporations have a lot more power than in the past. In learning how to operate within an organization, learning how to actually create change is called change management. And we talk a lot about that in applied sustainability, is a critical skill. It's not something that is the activist fighting against the system. Now you have activists within the system. And getting involved with small companies like this do two things. One, you're supporting kind of that resistance to this global domination of really large companies, which is, we all think is unsustainable. The second thing it does, it means that at the individual level, you're given the leadership opportunities to create change. Just think about the influence Brad can have across the horizontal breadth of that company, because he's centered in a place where everybody has to come through him. So it's not just integrated knowledge, it's the ability to reciprocate that and influence change throughout your entire organization. So what that means is you've got to be a leader at a young age. You don't have to think about change as you have to get really high in a company. I want to be the CEO to create change. Most change happens at the middle. That's why I'm in my position here at the College of Charleston. I can create the most change where I'm located rather than being the president. Think about that. I'm saying a lot there. So when we start to think about creating change and leadership, this is why I'm emphasizing it so much, because the vehicles for this kind of global change, even at the individual level, are very different than they were 20 years ago and very, very different than they were 50 years ago. Brad's creating change. People like him are creating change within an organizational structure. And it's not the typical activism against the system. You're active, you're an activist, believe me, I'm an activist, within the system. So I think that you highlight a really nice point here for the class, to be able to really think about how do we change this? Well, we're doing it, and a lot of people are already doing it. How do we join forces is the next question in order to kind of perpetuate a little bit further.
How do you feel about Nike transforming and following the path of Brooks? Do you think it's even a possibility because they're so large right now?
I think it's difficult. I mean, it would be a sea change, and I use that term literally, not figuratively. It would be, now there are a lot of things that they do to really try to position themselves as a sustainable company, but when you're just that size and breadth, a good example, and this falls up to the other girl's question is, so for example, we have Warren Buffett as our back, and which is really fantastic, because he actually came to our sales meeting and talked to us, and he basically just left it at this. He said, I would rather Brooks be this little company and maintain and have these great margins and be the company you are than sell out and make all these little changes. And I think that's where Nike, they're a victim of their own success. And it's not necessarily a good thing, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It would be a sea change though at Nike for them to really go back. And again, it goes back to the capitalistic thing. I mean, that's, at the end of the day, it's the bottom line. And for them to make those kind of full changes, the only way I could see them doing it is if they bought their own factory. That would be Nike's way. They are large enough, they are big enough, they can easily do it. But at the same time, there's a lot of things that go into the responsibility side of it, and it would be a huge investment. That would be the one, at least if I just looked at it from my standpoint and how they could really make that change, is if they made their own factory and basically saying, this is what we're going to pay the workers, this is going to be our waste, this is how we're laying out the entire program and our financial and fiscal responsibilities. That's the only way I can really foresee a large company like that making a huge change like that. I don't know. I don't work for Nike, so that would be a difficult thing. But just off the top of my head, that would be the one thing that I think that if they wanted to make the change, they could easily. I think I related to is, for example, our parents came over to Germany. Almost every house in Germany, we don't have much sun. I'll tell you that, we don't. But almost every house has solar panels on it, and a lot of when they do get them, they're actually housed and they're farming it. They're selling it back to the city. So it's just little things like this where they're overall, the average person's thinking about it, whereas here, and again, going back to the largest market and the largest economy, well, at least now, we're not going to be the largest economy very soon, but that being said, these aren't something that the average citizen thinks about, but over there, they do. Because not only in little things like Obama was trying to push through people, if you actually put these on your house, but they've been doing it in Germany for 10 years. And I think that's a microcosm of the bigger thing, is just the fact that the average citizen, the average person thinks about these things, whereas here, I don't think many people do. But it does institute, and it goes into the reflection of how they do their business as well.
You definitely think it's the individual that has a lot of, not direct say, I guess, but as a combined force, the individual is very powerful.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, you're the simple things. Nobody can fire a CEO except the people. That's founder of Nike, is no longer with Nike. Phil Knight is not with Nike anymore. He still collects paychecks, but he's not part of it. So, I mean, his philosophy and his mindsets, he's no longer with the company. So you're talking about this huge, huge company that the founder's no longer there and just sitting there collecting paychecks. Any other questions?
Can you tell us about consumer?
Real quick, last question.
Last one? Yeah, sure. In terms of what?
I mean, like clearly running is a big one. People are always saying run, that's not going to change. Even 100 years from now, someone's probably going to be doing that. Have you noticed in your work here some trends that are continuing or some that have just kind of fizzled out as fads?
Yeah.
How has the business responded to them? Have they put their eggs in one basket?
So I love that question because it absolutely ties perfectly into our philosophy. And I don't just say this because it is the anniversary today being 9/11. But one of the things when, and I still remember, of course, everyone remembers what happened on that, those years ago. On that day, one of the things that everyone was emphasizing, from the news and the media to everyone was saying, just don't change what you do every day. And the first thing that people don't do is like, don't take your kids out of soccer, don't take your kids out of what they're doing. And the industry that was the least impacted was our industry, the sporting goods industry, because the last thing any parent was ever going to do was take their kids out of sporting goods. So in terms of Forbes magazine, the 3 things people buy in a social economic recession was alcohol's number 1, cigarettes number 2, but running shoes and the like was number 3. So the thing is that people don't realize that it's just because it's a vice. So I had a person when I worked at ASICS, she was an elite marathon runner, broke up with her boyfriend, she doesn't drink, she doesn't smoke. What does she do? Her vice? She goes and runs. She went out and ran 30 miles. So that was her vice. Like that was her outlet. She's like, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I need to get this out. So in terms of going back to that, it's one of the most sustainable businesses because we just don't see this. We have a very, very steady growth. And it ebbs and flows. Of course, there are always ups and downs. One of the things, there's always trends in everything. Look at barefoot running, here and gone. It was minimalist. Minimalist is, so the one that was going back to one of the industrial design firms who work with IDEO, one of the things that they housed and helped us present a case was minimalism is a trend, lightweight is a reality. So lightweight shoes are not going to go away. Look at cars, it's the same exact thing. Cars are not steel anymore, they're plastic. It's not going away. Lightweight is the way of the future. So that's not going to be something that changed. But in terms of this minimalist, where you see people wearing these Vibram shoes, if you've ever seen these Vibram shoes they're called 5 fingers, they were banned by the U.S. military because every branch of service said they had too many people getting injured from it. It was a huge trend. That is something that absolutely, but lightweight shoes are not going to go away. But it's part of this all-encompassing thing. But the little thing and that's exactly a trend or a fad. It was this minimalist movement, but it was here and gone. And now but lightweight, it's always been, and it will continue to be part of running. And of course, the sporting goods industry it's still going to continue to grow and stay as it was, but there are not many times where there are these huge dips and valleys. And